The morning had started badly for Liz Wilson. Her alarm failed to go off, her coffee maker sputtered and died, and the taxi she ordered was 20 minutes late. By the time she arrived at the airport, her nerves were frayed like an old rope. The business presentation she had spent weeks preparing was scheduled for tomorrow morning in Chicago, and missing this flight wasn't an option. Final boarding call for Flight 237 to Chicago. The announcement echoed through the terminal as Liz rushed toward the gate, her wheeled suitcase bouncing wildly behind her. Her heels clicked rapidly against the shiny floor as she fumbled with her boarding pass. "You're just in time, ma'am," the gate agent said with a practiced smile, scanning her ticket. "We were about to close the doors." Liz didn't bother to return the smile. "Well, I'm here now," she said, smoothing her designer blazer as she hurried down the jet bridge. The flight attendant greeted her at the door of the plane, but Liz barely noticed as she scanned the rows for her seat. The aircraft was packed. Weekend travelers, business people, and families filled nearly every spot. She made her way down the narrow aisle, bumping her bag against several shoulders without stopping to apologize. "Excuse me, that's my seat," she said sharply to an elderly woman who had mistakenly sat in her assigned spot. The woman apologized profusely and moved over, but Liz was too focused on stowing her luggage to acknowledge her. Just as she settled into her seat and pulled out her tablet to review her presentation one last time, Liz glanced up and noticed something that made her stomach tighten. 3 rows ahead, a man in his early 60s was adjusting his seatbelt. Nothing unusual about that, except for the bright red MAGA hat perched firmly on his head. Liz felt her blood pressure rising. How dare someone wear something so provocative on a plane? Didn't he know how many people would find that offensive? She tried to focus on her work, but her eyes kept darting back to that red hat. Each time she saw it, her irritation grew. The plane began to push back from the gate, and the flight attendants started their safety demonstration. Liz ignored it, her mind churning with righteous indignation. Before she knew it, they were in the air, climbing through the clouds toward cruising altitude. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, Liz unfastened hers immediately and stood up. "Ma'am, we haven't reached our cruising altitude yet," a flight attendant said gently. "Please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened." "I need to change seats," Liz insisted, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "There's a problem." The flight attendant, whose name tag read Penny, looked concerned. "What seems to be the issue?" Liz pointed toward the front of the plane. "That man in the red hat. I find it deeply offensive, and I'm not comfortable sitting anywhere near him." Penny's professional smile didn't waver, but her eyes showed she'd handled situations like this before. "I understand, ma'am, but the flight is completely full today. There are no other seats available." "Then ask him to remove the hat," Liz demanded, crossing her arms. Several passengers were now watching the exchange with interest. A few had taken out their phones, though whether to avoid the awkwardness by scrolling through social media or to record the developing situation wasn't clear. "I'm afraid I can't do that, ma'am," Penny explained. "Passengers are allowed to wear hats on the flight regardless of what's printed on them, as long as they're not offensive in nature." "Not offensive?" Liz's voice rose an octave. "That hat represents everything that's wrong with this country. How can you say it's not offensive?" The man in the red hat had turned slightly in his seat, aware that he was being discussed. Rather than engaging, he simply returned to reading something on his tablet, his face calm and unreadable. Penny lowered her voice. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. Political apparel is permitted on our flights. If you continue to disrupt the cabin, I'll need to involve the captain." A middle-aged woman across the aisle leaned over. "You know, some of us just want a peaceful flight. Can you take your political opinions elsewhere?" Liz shot her a withering look. "So you're one of them too, I suppose?" "I didn't say anything about my politics," the woman replied. "I just want to read my book without a shouting match." By now, several phones were definitely recording. A young man in the row behind Liz wasn't even trying to be subtle about it. "Are you recording me?" Liz demanded, turning on him. "That's an invasion of my privacy." "We're in a public space," the young man replied with a shrug. "And you're making quite a scene." Penny, the flight attendant, stepped between them. "Ma'am, please return to your seat immediately, or I will have to report this as an incident." The word incident seemed to penetrate Liz's anger. An incident report could mean being met by security upon landing. It could mean being put on a no-fly list. It could mean never making it to her presentation. With visible reluctance, she returned to her seat, but not before announcing loudly, I want everyone to know that I find that hat and everything it stands for completely unacceptable." The man in the hat didn't turn around. As Liz buckled her seatbelt, she pulled out her phone and began typing furiously. "Trapped on Flight 237 with MAGA supporter," she wrote on her social media account. "Airline refusing to act. So boycott airline unacceptable." The post sent, and almost immediately likes and supportive comments began to appear. The validation fueled her sense of righteousness. 20 minutes into the flight, Penny returned with the drink cart. When she reached Liz, she offered a professional but noticeably cooler smile than she had given to other passengers. "Would you care for a beverage, ma'am?" "Diet Cola," Liz said without looking up from her phone. "No ice." As Penny poured the drink, the plane hit a small pocket of turbulence. The cola sloshed slightly over the edge of the cup as she handed it to Liz. "Really?" Liz said, dabbing at her sleeve with a thin cocktail napkin. "Is this how you treat all your passengers?" "I apologize for the turbulence, ma'am," Penny replied evenly. "It's beyond our control." The passenger across the aisle rolled her eyes, no longer bothering to hide her annoyance. As the drink service continued, Liz noticed Penny approaching the man in the MAGA hat. To her outrage, their interaction seemed much more friendly. Penny smiled genuinely, and the man nodded respectfully as she served him. They exchanged a few words that Liz couldn't hear, and then Penny even laughed at something he said. "Unbelievable," Liz muttered, loud enough for those around her to hear. "Special treatment for the red hats." The flight continued with Liz stewing in her seat. She tried to focus on her presentation, but found herself repeatedly glancing toward the man in the hat. Why wasn't anyone else bothered by this? How could they all sit there so calmly? When the man got up to use the lavatory, Liz tracked him with her eyes. As he walked past her row, she noticed that he was well dressed in a subtle, expensive way. His watch alone probably cost more than her monthly rent, not the stereotypical image she had in her mind. The man noticed her staring and gave her a small, polite nod as he passed. This somehow made Liz even more furious. How dare he be civil after what his kind had done to the country? When he returned to his seat a few minutes later, Liz deliberately stuck her foot slightly into the aisle. Not enough to actually trip him, but enough to make a point. The man simply stepped over her foot without comment and continued back to his seat. "Coward," she whispered under her breath. As the flight approached the halfway mark, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some weather ahead. The seatbelt sign has been turned on, and I'm asking our flight attendants to take their seats for the next few minutes." Sure enough, the plane began to bounce and shake as they hit turbulence. Liz gripped her armrests, her knuckles turning white. She had always hated turbulence. A particularly strong jolt caused several passengers to gasp. Liz's tablet slid off her tray table and clattered to the floor, skidding forward several rows before coming to rest, right at the feet of the man in the red hat. Liz unbuckled her seatbelt, ignoring the illuminated sign. "Ma'am, please remain seated," Penny called from her jump seat at the back of the cabin. "My tablet," Liz said, already standing. Another bump sent her stumbling forward, grabbing seatbacks to stay upright. To her horror, the man in the hat had noticed her tablet. He picked it up and was looking at it, probably snooping through her personal files and presentation. Liz rushed forward, steadying herself against the rocking of the plane. "That's mine," she said, snatching it from his hands before he could respond. The man looked up at her with a neutral expression. "You're welcome," he said quietly. Before Liz could respond, Penny was beside her. "Ma'am, you need to return to your seat immediately. You're endangering yourself and others." "He took my tablet," Liz said defensively. "I saw him pick it up after it slid forward," Penny countered. "Now please return to your seat or I will have to file an incident report." Red-faced, Liz made her way back to her seat as the plane continued to bounce through the air. The rest of the passengers were watching her now, most with undisguised disapproval. As she sat down, she heard someone behind her mutter, "Plain Karen," followed by stifled laughter. The label stung more than Liz wanted to admit. Was she being unreasonable? No, she decided. She was standing up for what was right. That man in his hat represented everything she opposed. She was on the right side of history here. As the turbulence subsided and the flight continued toward Chicago, Liz couldn't help but notice that Penny was now avoiding her section entirely. Having another flight attendant serve her row, the man in the hat, meanwhile had returned to his tablet, seemingly unbothered by the whole encounter. His calm only irritated Liz further. She had no idea that their paths were about to cross again in a way that would change everything. As the plane leveled out and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Liz tried to refocus on her presentation. Tomorrow morning she would stand before the board of directors at Midwest Marketing Solutions and pitch her agency's services. Everything had to be perfect, but her concentration kept drifting back to the man in the MAGA hat. He sat there 3 rows ahead, completely unbothered by the stir he'd caused. It wasn't right. Didn't he understand what that symbol meant to people like her? Liz pulled out her phone and snapped a discreet photo of the back of his head, making sure the red hat was clearly visible. She posted it to her social media with the caption, "2 hours trapped on a plane with this. Flight attendants refuse to do anything. Your plane nightmare, darjekering stand up to hate." The likes and comments started rolling in immediately. "So sorry you have to deal with this. Disgusting that they allow this. Name the airline so we can boycott." The validation felt good. At least her followers understood. "Excuse me," came a voice from across the aisle. The middle-aged woman who had spoken up earlier was looking directly at Liz. "Did you just take a photo of that man without his permission?" Liz lowered her voice. "It's a public space." "That doesn't make it right," the woman replied. "How would you feel if someone was photographing you and posting it online with nasty comments?" "It's not the same thing," Liz insisted. "He's the one making a political statement with that hat. I'm just calling it out." The woman shook her head. "You don't know anything about him. Maybe there's more to his story than just a hat." "The hat says everything I need to know," Liz replied dismissively, turning away to end the conversation. An hour into the flight, the meal service began. Liz had pre-ordered a vegetarian meal, and when Penny placed it in front of her, Liz couldn't help but notice it looked less appetizing than the regular options. "This doesn't look fresh," she complained, poking at the pasta with her plastic fork. "I apologize." "Ma'am," Penny said with practiced patience, "that's the standard vegetarian meal for today's flight. Would you prefer the chicken instead?" "No, I don't eat meat," Liz said, "but I expected something better than this." Penny's professional smile remained fixed in place. "I'll note your feedback for our catering department." As Penny moved on, Liz watched her serve the man in the red hat. To her annoyance, their interaction seemed friendly again. The man thanked Penny by name and she smiled genuinely at him. When Penny moved away, the man unwrapped his meal, then paused. He leaned across the aisle to speak quietly with an elderly woman who seemed to be traveling alone. After a brief conversation, they exchanged meal trays. Liz couldn't hear the exchange, but it appeared the woman had dietary restrictions that made the regular meal unsuitable. This small act of kindness didn't fit with Liz's mental image of a MAGA hat wearer. She pushed the thought away and focused on picking at her mediocre pasta. Mid-meal, the plane hit another patch of turbulence. Not as bad as before, but enough to make the drinks wobble. Liz's cup of coffee, which she'd balanced precariously on her tray, tipped over. Hot liquid spread across the tray and dripped onto her cream-colored pants. "No, no, no," she gasped, grabbing for napkins. There weren't enough to soak up the spill, and coffee continued to drip onto her outfit. "Here," said the man sitting next to her, offering his unused cocktail napkins, but they were quickly soaked through as well. Just then, a hand extended into her row, holding a pack of travel wipes. Liz looked up to see the man in the red hat standing there. "These might help," he said simply. Liz was so surprised that she took the package without thinking. Thanks," she mumbled. The man nodded and returned to his seat without another word. Liz used the wipes to clean up the worst of the coffee stains. They worked surprisingly well. She glanced toward the front of the plane, where the red hat was once again visible above the seat. Why would he help her after how she'd behaved? It didn't make sense. People like him weren't supposed to be kind to people like her. That wasn't how the world worked. As the flight attendants collected the meal trays, Liz noticed something else odd. Penny seemed to be treating the man with unusual deference. When she spoke to him, her posture changed slightly. More attentive, more respectful than with other first-class passengers. Probably just trying to avoid a complaint, Liz muttered to herself, bending over backward for the privileged. But a nagging doubt had planted itself in her mind. Was she missing something about this man? 2 hours into the flight, Liz needed to use the lavatory, As she waited in the small queue that had formed, she found herself standing right behind the man in the red hat. Up close, she noticed details she hadn't before. His well-tailored suit, the expensive leather watch on his wrist, his perfectly polished shoes. He turned slightly, becoming aware of her presence, and gave her a polite nod. Liz didn't return it. Instead, she found herself saying, "I'm surprised someone like you flies commercial." The man raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me?" "With the hat," Liz said, gesturing vaguely. "I would have thought private jets were more your style." The man considered her words before responding. "I've found you learn more about the world when you're part of it, not flying above it." Before Liz could formulate a response, the lavatory door opened, and the man stepped inside. She was left standing there, processing his words. They weren't what she expected. They sounded almost reasonable. When Liz returned to her seat, she found herself watching the man more carefully. He spent most of the flight working quietly on his tablet, occasionally making notes on a leather-bound notepad. Nothing about his behavior was disruptive or confrontational. If it weren't for the hat, he would have been just another business traveler. As the flight began its initial descent into Chicago, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach to Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Local time is 11:45 a.m., and the weather is partly cloudy with a temperature of 62 degrees. On behalf of the entire crew, I want to thank you for choosing our airline today." The captain paused for a moment before continuing. "I'd also like to extend a special welcome to a distinguished passenger on today's flight. While he prefers to travel without fanfare, we're honored to have him aboard." Liz's curiosity was piqued. A celebrity? A politician? She craned her neck, trying to spot who it might be. "Now, please ensure your seatbelts are fastened as we prepare for landing," the captain finished, without identifying the VIP. As the plane descended, Liz noticed one of the flight attendants, not Penny, but an older man with a senior-looking uniform, approached the passenger in the MAGA hat. They spoke quietly, the flight attendant leaning down respectfully. "Mr. Reynolds," she overheard the attendant say, "the captain wanted me to personally thank you for flying with us today." Reynolds? The name sounded vaguely familiar to Liz, but she couldn't place it. The flight attendant continued, "Will you be joining the meeting at headquarters tomorrow, sir?" Meeting at headquarters? What meeting? And why would this man be invited to the airline's headquarters? The man in the hat, Mr. Reynolds apparently, nodded and said something Liz couldn't hear. The flight attendant smiled broadly and retreated to his station for landing. Liz's mind was racing. Who was this Reynolds person, and why was the airline staff treating him like royalty? A quick search on her phone before the final descent revealed nothing obvious about anyone named Reynolds connected to the airline. The wheels touched down on the runway and the plane began taxiing to the gate. Liz noticed another odd thing. Penny and two other flight attendants had gathered near the man's row, speaking to him in low, deferential tones. One of them was showing him some kind of document, which he reviewed with practiced ease before signing. The pieces weren't fitting together in Liz's mind. A man in a MAGA hat being treated like airline royalty? It didn't match her worldview. People who wore those hats were supposed to be a certain type, not the type who got special treatment on flights or signed important-looking documents. As the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began the usual rush to retrieve luggage and exit. Liz gathered her things quickly, eager to make her connection and put this strange flight behind her. But as she stood waiting for the line to move, she couldn't help overhearing a conversation between two flight attendants just behind. "The curtain separating first class from the galley. I can't believe he flies commercial when he could take the company jet," one said. "That's just how he is," the other replied. "Says he likes to experience the service as a regular passenger. That's why he's so good at what he does." "Well, it's not every day you have the owner on your flight," the first one said with a nervous laugh. "I'm just glad everything went smoothly." "The owner?" Liz's heart sank to her stomach. The owner of what? Surely they couldn't mean... As the line finally began to move and passengers filed toward the exit, Liz watched as the captain himself emerged from the cockpit to shake hands with Mr. Reynolds. The captain's next words confirmed her worst fears. "Thank you for flying with us today. Mr. Reynolds, the entire Reynolds Airlines family is always honored to have you aboard." Reynolds Airlines, the very company whose plane she was standing on. the airline she had threatened to boycott on social media just hours ago. And suddenly, Liz understood exactly who the man in the red hat was. Liz stood frozen in the aisle, her carry-on handle clutched tightly in her sweating palm. The man she had berated, photographed, and tried to humiliate was Thomas Reynolds, founder and CEO of Reynolds Airlines, the company that operated over 1,200 planes, the company whose logo was emblazoned on the very aircraft she was standing in. "Ma'am, are you planning to deplane?" The gentle voice of the passenger behind her broke through her shock. "Yes, sorry," she mumbled, moving forward on autopilot. As she approached the exit, she saw Reynolds speaking with the captain and another man in a dark suit who had boarded the plane after landing. Reynolds had removed his red hat and tucked it into his jacket pocket, revealing a full head of silver-gray hair. Liz kept her head down as she passed the group, praying he wouldn't recognize her. But just as she reached the jet bridge, she heard his voice. "Excuse me, miss." Liz considered pretending she hadn't heard, but several heads turned her way. She had no choice but to stop and face him. "Yes?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Reynolds looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not anger. Not gloating, maybe. Curiosity? "You dropped this," he said, holding out her phone charger, which must have fallen from her bag. "Oh, thank you." Liz took it quickly, her cheeks burning with shame. Reynolds nodded politely and returned to his conversation. Liz hurried into the terminal, her mind racing. The airline's owner. She had publicly insulted and tried to shame the owner of the airline. She had posted his photo online with a call to boycott his own company. Her stomach twisted into knots as she imagined him looking up her name on the passenger manifest, blacklisting her from future flights, maybe even calling her boss to complain. Her phone buzzed with notifications. The social media posts she'd made during the flight had gained traction. Hundreds of comments, shares, and likes. Her stomach sank further as she scrolled through them. Name and shame the airline. "I'm never flying with them again." That hat should be banned from public places. What had seemed righteous on the plane now filled her with dread. She had whipped up a mob against Reynolds Airlines without knowing who she was dealing with. Worse, she had completely misread the situation. The flight attendants hadn't been showing favoritism to a random passenger in a MAGA hat. They had been showing appropriate respect to their boss. Liz stopped in the middle of the busy terminal and deleted both posts, but she knew it was too late. Things spread quickly online and screenshots were forever. She wouldn't be surprised if the videos other passengers had taken were already circulating. As she made her way to baggage claim, Liz spotted a familiar face, the middle-aged woman who had been sitting across from her on the plane. "Quite a show you put on back there," the woman said, falling into step beside her. "I don't want to talk about it," Liz replied, quickening her pace. "You know who that was, don't you?" the woman persisted. "Thomas Reynolds. Built the airline from scratch 20 years ago. Started with 2 planes and a dream. Now it's the 5th largest carrier in the country." Liz's step faltered. "How do you know so much about him?" The woman smiled. "I've been a flight attendant for Reynolds for 15 years. I was deadheading back to Chicago today. That's traveling off duty," she explained, seeing Liz's confusion. "And let me tell you, in all those years, I've never seen Mr. Reynolds lose his cool. Not once. Not even with passengers like you." Liz felt her defenses rise. "Passengers like me? What's that supposed to mean? The ones who make snap judgments? Who see a hat or a shirt or a pin and think they know everything about a person?" The woman sighed. "Mr. Reynolds lost his son in Afghanistan 6 years ago. The hat, it was his son's. He wears it sometimes, especially when he's visiting his son's friends from the service. Which, if I had to guess, is where he was coming from today." The words hit Liz like a physical blow. The hat had been his dead son's. And she had. "I didn't know," she whispered. "That's kind of the point," the woman said, not unkindly. "None of us ever really knows someone else's story just by looking at them." With that, the woman headed off toward the employee exit, leaving Liz standing alone by the baggage carousel. Liz's phone buzzed again. A text from her boss. "Call me now." Her heart sank. Had Reynolds already made a complaint? With trembling fingers, she dialed the number. "Liz, have you seen what's happening online?" Her boss, Greg, asked without preamble. "I think so," she replied cautiously. "You're trending. Airline Karen, that's you, right?" "The videos are everywhere," Liz closed her eyes in horror. So it had already happened. She'd become one of those people, the ones who got filmed having public meltdowns and then were forever immortalized in viral videos. Greg, I can explain. Explain what? That you got into a shouting match with some random guy over a hat? That you posted photos of him online? That you called for a boycott of the airline we're trying to land as a client? Liz felt the blood drain from her face. What did you just say? Reynolds Airlines, Greg said slowly, as if speaking to a child. The pitch meeting tomorrow. The one you flew to Chicago for? Ring any bells? The pitch meeting. For Reynolds Airlines, the same company whose CEO she had just publicly insulted. Oh no, she whispered. Oh no is right, Greg said. The social media team just forwarded me a screenshot where you specifically call for a boycott of the airline we're pitching tomorrow. Do you have any idea how bad this looks for the agency? I'm so sorry, Greg, I didn't know. Didn't know what? That actions have consequences? That social media is public? That we're a marketing agency that relies on our professional reputation? I didn't know it was him, Liz said weakly. Him who? Greg demanded. The man in the hat. I didn't know he was Thomas Reynolds. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Are you telling me, Greg finally said, his voice dangerously quiet, that you got into a public argument with Thomas Reynolds himself? The CEO of Reynolds Airlines? The man who would be signing our contract tomorrow? Yes, Liz admitted. But Greg, I had no idea who he was. He was just wearing this MAGA hat and I... Stop, just stop. Greg's voice was ice cold now. The meeting is canceled. Reynolds' office called 30 minutes ago. No explanation given, just canceled. Now I know why. Liz felt sick. What do you want me to do? Nothing. There's nothing you can do to fix this. Just get on the next flight home. We'll discuss your future with the company when you get back. The line went dead. Liz stared at her phone in disbelief. Her career, which she had spent the last decade building, was potentially over because of one impulsive confrontation. As she stood there, shell-shocked, her luggage appeared on the carousel. She grabbed it mechanically and headed toward the exit, her mind still reeling. Outside, the taxi line stretched far down the sidewalk. It would be at least a 30-minute wait. Liz leaned against a pillar, feeling utterly defeated. Ms. Wilson? Liz looked up to see a driver in a dark suit holding a sign with her name on it. Yes, that's me, she said, confused. She hadn't arranged for a car service. Mr. Reynolds asked me to ensure you reach your hotel safely, the driver explained, taking her luggage. Mr. Reynolds? Liz repeated, certain she had misheard. Yes, ma'am. He noticed you seemed distressed after the flight and wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Liz was speechless as the driver led her to a sleek black car waiting in the VIP pickup area. Why would Reynolds, after everything that had happened, arrange a car for her? As she settled into the back seat, she noticed an envelope on the seat beside her with her name written on it. With shaking hands, she opened it and found a business card for Thomas Reynolds, CEO, with a handwritten note on the back. Ms. Wilson, I believe we got off on the wrong foot today. Perhaps we both made assumptions that deserve a second look. If you're interested in a conversation rather than a confrontation, my office is on the 32nd floor of the Reynolds building downtown. 10 a.m. tomorrow. The car will be waiting if you decide to come. Liz stared at the card in disbelief. Was this a trap? Was he planning to humiliate her as revenge? Or was it possible that Thomas Reynolds, despite everything that had happened, was actually offering her a chance to make things right? As the car pulled away from the curb, Liz looked out at the Chicago skyline coming into view. In the distance, she could make out the Reynolds building, its logo illuminated against the afternoon sky. Tomorrow morning, she would have to decide whether to face the man in the red hat one more time. Liz barely slept that night. She tossed and turned in her hotel bed, replaying the day's events in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas Reynolds' face, felt the weight of her impulsive actions, and imagined the disappointed look on Greg's face when she returned to the office. Around 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep altogether and opened her laptop. Unable to resist, she typed Airline Karen into the search bar. The results made her sick to her stomach. Dozens of videos all showing different angles of her confrontation with Reynolds, comments ranging from mockingly amused to downright vicious. One clip had over 2 million views already. In most of the videos, she appeared exactly as she feared, entitled, unreasonable, and completely unaware of who she was dealing with. The worst part was that none of the videos included the revelation of Reynolds' identity. To the online world, she was just another Karen, harassing a random passenger over political differences. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She'd become the villain in her own story. As dawn broke over Chicago, Liz stood at her hotel window looking out at the city. The Reynolds building was clearly visible from her room, as if taunting her with the decision she needed to make. Should she go to the meeting Reynolds had offered? Or should she just book the earliest flight home and try to salvage what was left of her career? After a long shower during which she rehearsed a dozen different apologies in her head, Liz made her decision. She would face Reynolds. Whatever his intentions, whether to berate her, fire her client, or something else entirely, she would face the consequences of her actions head-on. She dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, a navy blue suit with a simple white blouse. No flashy jewelry or accessories. Nothing that could be interpreted as confrontational or attention-seeking. At precisely 9:30 a.m., there was a knock on her hotel room door. The same driver from yesterday stood in the hallway. "Good morning, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Reynolds asked me to check if you would be joining him this morning." Liz took a deep breath. "Yes, I'll be there." The drive to the Reynolds building was silent. Liz stared out the window, trying to calm her racing heart. What could Reynolds possibly want from this meeting? Revenge? A public apology? To personally tell her that her company would never work with his airline? The Reynolds building was an impressive glass and steel structure that dominated its section of the skyline. As the car pulled up to the entrance, Liz felt like she was heading to her own execution. The lobby was sleek and modern, with a massive model of the first Reynolds airplane suspended from the ceiling. Security was tight. Liz had to show ID and be cleared by a receptionist before being directed to a private elevator. "Their second floor," the security guard said. "Mr. Reynolds' office. They're expecting you." The elevator ride gave Liz one last chance to compose herself. When the doors opened, she stepped out into a reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. A friendly-looking woman at the desk greeted her. "Miss Wilson, Mr. Reynolds is ready for you. Please follow me." Liz had expected to be led to a formal boardroom or an imposing executive office. Instead, the receptionist took her to a small, comfortable meeting room with a round table and just 4 chairs. A coffee service was set up on a side table along with a plate of pastries. "Mr. Reynolds will be with you shortly," the receptionist said before leaving. Alone in the room, Liz took in her surroundings. The walls featured photographs of airplanes, from the earliest biplanes to modern jets. One wall held what looked like family photos, a younger Reynolds with a woman who must be his wife, and a young man in military uniform. The son he had lost in Afghanistan, Liz realized with a pang of guilt. She was studying the photo when the door opened. Thomas Reynolds entered dressed in a simple button-down shirt and slacks. "No tie, no red hat, Ms. Wilson," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Liz shook his hand, surprised by the genuine warmth in his voice. "Mr. Reynolds, I want to apologize for my behavior yesterday. It was completely unprofessional and—" Reynolds held up a hand, cutting her off. "Why don't we sit down first? Coffee?" Liz nodded mutely and took a seat while Reynolds poured 2 cups of coffee. He placed one in front of her before sitting down across the table. "Cream or sugar?" he asked. "Black is fine," Liz replied, her mouth dry. Reynolds took a sip of his own coffee before speaking. "I'm guessing you've had a difficult night." Liz let out a hollow laugh. "That would be an understatement, sir. Please call me Tom," he gestured to her untouched coffee. "Drink, it might help." Liz took a small sip, surprised by the rich flavor. "This isn't airplane coffee." That earned a genuine smile from Reynolds. "No, it's not. Though we're working on improving that too." An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Liz couldn't stand it anymore. "Mr. Reynolds, Tom, I need to apologize. My behavior on that flight was inexcusable. I made assumptions about you based on a hat. I tried to shame you publicly. I called for a boycott of your company, and I had no idea." She trailed off, unsure how to continue. "No idea it was my company?" Reynolds supplied. "Or no idea about the hat?" Liz looked down at her coffee. "Both, honestly. A flight attendant told me afterward that it was your son's, that he served in Afghanistan. I'm truly sorry for your loss." Reynolds nodded, his eyes moving briefly to the photo on the wall. "David, he was 24 when we lost him. That hat, it wasn't actually his. It belonged to one of his friends from his unit. The friend gave it to me at David's funeral. Said David had always borrowed it for good luck before missions. Liz felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. I had no right to judge you. No, you didn't, Reynolds agreed, his voice gentle but firm. Just as I had no right to judge you based on your reaction to the hat. We both made assumptions, didn't we? Liz looked up confused. What assumptions did you make about me? Reynolds leaned back in his chair. When I saw your reaction to the hat, I assumed you were just another angry person looking for confrontation. Someone who wanted attention at any cost. It wasn't until I watched you with that phone charger, the panic on your face when you realized who I was, that I wondered if there might be more to your story. He took another sip of coffee. So I looked into you a bit. Liz Wilson, senior account executive at Madison Square Marketing, graduated top of your class, built an impressive client roster over the past decade, not the profile of someone who typically causes scenes on airplanes. Liz felt exposed, knowing he had researched her. Yesterday wasn't my finest moment, she admitted. We all have moments we're not proud of, Reynolds said. The question is what we do afterward. Liz met his gaze directly. Is that why you invited me here? To see what I'd do? Reynolds smiled. Partly. I was curious if you'd have the courage to face me after what happened. Many wouldn't. And the other part? Liz asked. The other part is more complicated. Reynolds stood and walked to the window. That hat. I don't wear it for political reasons. I wear it because it connects me to my son, but I'm not naive. I know what it represents to many people. I know the assumptions people make when they see it. He turned back to face her. Just as I'm sure you know the assumptions people make when they watch those videos of you online. Liz winced. The Karen videos. Yes, I've seen them. Both of us have been reduced to stereotypes, Reynolds said. You, the entitled woman making a scene. Me, the wealthy conservative flaunting his politics. Neither image is accurate, is it? Liz shook her head slowly. Reynolds returned to his seat. I didn't cancel your company's pitch meeting because I was angry at you, Ms. Wilson. You didn't? Liz asked, surprised. No. I canceled it because I wanted to meet with you personally first. He leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. Your company was proposing a new marketing campaign for Reynolds Airlines, correct? Liz nodded. Yes, focusing on customer experience and community values. Ironic given yesterday's events, Reynolds said with a wry smile. But it got me thinking. Both of us experienced a moment where assumptions and misunderstandings led to conflict. We're not alone in that, are we? No, Liz agreed. It happens all the time. Exactly. And in today's world, those moments get amplified. They go viral. People become characters in stories rather than human beings. Reynolds reached for a folder that had been sitting on the side table and placed it in front of Liz. Open it. Inside was a single page with a concept sketch. The headline read, There's more to the story. What is this? Liz asked. A new campaign idea, Reynolds replied. One that addresses the very thing we experienced. The rush to judgment. The assumptions we make about each other. The stories we don't know when we look at someone and see only what's on the surface. Liz stared at the page, her marketing mind immediately grasping the potential. You want to turn our confrontation into a campaign? Reynolds shook his head. Not the confrontation itself. That stays private. But the lesson from it, that's something worth sharing, don't you think? Before Liz could respond, there was a knock at the door. The receptionist poked her head in. Mr. Reynolds, your next appointment has arrived. Reynolds nodded. Thank you, Joan. Tell them I'll be right with them. He turned back to Liz. I have to cut this short, but I want you to think about what we've discussed. Your flight home isn't until tomorrow, correct? Yes, Liz confirmed, still trying to process what was happening. Good. Then perhaps we can continue this conversation over dinner tonight. Reynolds stood and extended his hand again. 7 o'clock? The car will pick you up. Liz shook his hand, feeling as if she had stepped into an alternate reality. Yes, thank you. As she left the Reynolds building and stepped back into the bright Chicago morning, Liz's phone buzzed with a text from Greg. Any update? Are we completely screwed with Reynolds? Liz looked up at the towering building behind her, then back at her phone. The truth was, she didn't know where things stood with Reynolds Airlines, but for the first time since the disastrous flight, she felt a glimmer of hope. Meeting went better than expected, she texted back. We'll know more tonight. As she pocketed her phone, she noticed a news alert pop up. Clicking on it revealed yet another article about Airline Karen and her viral meltdown. There was her face, twisted in self-righteous anger, forever preserved on the internet. Yet somehow, the sting had lessened. Because now she knew something. The online mob didn't. There was indeed more to the story. 6 months later, Liz stood nervously backstage at the National Advertising Awards. The campaign she had helped create for Reynolds Airlines, There's More to the Story, had been nominated for Best Corporate Rebranding. It still felt surreal. After that fateful meeting in Chicago, things had moved quickly. The dinner with Thomas Reynolds that evening had stretched into a 3-hour conversation about assumptions, social media, and the growing divide between people. By dessert, they had sketched out the bones of what would become Reynolds Airlines' most successful campaign in years. 5 minutes, Ms. Wilson, a production assistant said, touching her lightly on the elbow. Liz nodded her thanks and smoothed her dress. In the audience, she knew Greg and the rest of her team were seated at a prime table, along with Reynolds and his executive team. Who would have thought 6 months ago that they would end up here? The campaign had been both simple and powerful. It featured real stories of passengers and airline employees whose lives were more complex and interesting than surface appearances suggested. The first commercial, which had gone viral for all the right reasons, showed a businessman in a suit being dismissive to a flight attendant, only to discover later that she was a published poet whose work had changed his daughter's life. The tagline at the end was elegant in its simplicity. There's more to the story. Reynolds Airlines, seeing the whole picture. Reynolds had insisted that neither his nor Liz's actual confrontation be used in the campaign. That stays between us, he had said firmly. But everyone at the agency and the airline knew the true inspiration behind the ads. The MC's voice boomed through the speakers. And now, to present the award for Best Corporate Rebranding, please welcome industry legend Kathy Johnson. Liz took a deep breath and peeked out at the audience. Greg gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up from the table. Beside him, Thomas Reynolds sat calmly, his expression unreadable. They hadn't discussed what would happen if they won, who would speak, what they would say. The nominees for Best Corporate Rebranding are. Kathy Johnson read through the list, and Liz felt a flutter of pride when the screen showed clips from the Reynolds Airlines campaign. The audience reacted with appreciative murmurs, and the winner is. Johnson paused dramatically, opening the envelope. Reynolds Airlines for There's More to the Story. The spotlight found their table as applause filled the room. Greg jumped to his feet, clapping enthusiastically. Reynolds stood more slowly, buttoning his jacket, and turned to Liz with a nod. The message was clear. This was her moment. As Liz made her way to the stage, her mind flashed back to that horrible day on the plane. The anger, the self-righteousness, the public shaming. How had that led to this? She accepted the award with shaking hands and stepped to the microphone. Thank you. This honor belongs to everyone at Reynolds Airlines and Madison Square Marketing who believed in this campaign. But its spirit belongs to every person who has ever been misunderstood, misjudged, or reduced to a single story. Liz paused, finding Reynolds in the audience. We live in a world that encourages quick judgments. See someone wearing the wrong hat, they must be the enemy. Witness someone having a bad day, film it and share it for the world to mock. But what if we paused before rushing to judgment? What if we considered that there might be more to the story? The audience had grown quiet, listening intently. This campaign began with a moment of conflict, a moment I'm not proud of. A moment when I saw someone only through the lens of my own assumptions and prejudices. I was wrong, and being wrong taught me one of the most valuable lessons of my life. Liz raised the award slightly. So this is for everyone who has ever been wrong but had the courage to admit it. For everyone who has been judged unfairly but responded with grace. And most of all, for those willing to believe that there's always more to the story. Thank you. The applause was warm as Liz left the stage. As she returned to her seat, Reynolds stood to greet her with a handshake that turned into a brief hug. Well said, he whispered. After the ceremony, at the crowded reception, Liz found herself surrounded by industry colleagues eager to hear more about the campaign. She answered their questions politely but felt a growing need for fresh air. Excusing herself, she stepped out onto a quiet balcony overlooking the city. She had barely taken a breath when the door opened behind her. Thomas Reynolds joined her at the railing, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her one. "Thanks." Liz took a sip. "It's been quite a night." Reynolds nodded, looking out at the city lights. "Quite a 6 months, really." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "You know," Reynolds finally said, "I've been thinking about that day on the plane a lot lately." Liz winced slightly. "Not your finest moment as a passenger?" Reynolds chuckled. "Actually, I was thinking that it might have been one of my finest moments as a human being." Liz looked at him surprised. "Before that day," he continued, "I wore David's friend's hat without really thinking about what it might represent to others. I knew it had become a political symbol, of course, but to me, it was just a connection to my son." He took a sip of his champagne. "But that day on the plane, seeing your reaction, and the reactions of others, made me realize I was being willfully blind. I was using my personal connection to the hat as an excuse to ignore its broader impact." "That doesn't excuse how I behaved," Liz said quietly. "No, it doesn't," Reynolds agreed. "But it started a conversation that needed to happen, and not just between you and me." He turned to face her directly. "The campaign we created wasn't just good marketing, Liz, it was good for people. In a small way, maybe it helped bridge some of the divides that are tearing at us." Liz considered his words. The response to the campaign had been remarkable, not just in terms of business metrics, but in the stories people had shared in response. Reynolds Airlines had created a website where customers could share their own more-to-the-story moments, and it had been flooded with submissions. "I have something for you," Reynolds said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small box and handed it to her. Liz opened it curiously. Inside was a simple pin, the Reynolds Airlines logo with the words "There's more to the story" engraved below it. "We're giving these to every employee," Reynolds explained, "as a reminder. But I wanted you to have the first one." Liz was touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Tom. There's something else." Reynolds seemed slightly hesitant. "The board has approved a new initiative based on the campaign's success. We're establishing a scholarship fund in David's name. It will support education in conflict resolution and cross-cultural understanding." "That's wonderful," Liz said sincerely. "We'd like you to serve on the selection committee," Reynolds continued. "Your perspective would be valuable." Liz was speechless for a moment. "I'd be honored," she finally managed. Reynolds nodded, satisfied. "Good. And one more thing." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out the red MAGA hat. "I've been wondering what to do with this. I don't want to throw it away because of what it means to me personally. But I also don't think I'll be wearing it in public anymore." He turned the hat over in his hands. "I've decided to put it in a shadow box in my office along with a photo of David and his friend, a private reminder rather than a public statement." "That seems right," Liz said. Reynolds looked at her thoughtfully. "You know, the world would be a better place if more people could do what you did. Have a public meltdown on an airplane?" Liz asked with a self-deprecating smile. Reynolds laughed. "No. Admit when they're wrong and work to make things better." He raised his glass in a toast. "To seeing the whole picture." Liz clinked her glass against his. "To more to the story." As they turned to head back inside, Liz's phone buzzed with a notification. It was from one of the industry news sites. Reynolds, Airline's campaign wins big. The surprising story behind the ads. Liz showed it to Reynolds. "Should I be worried?" Reynolds skimmed the headline and shrugged. "Let them speculate. They'll never know the whole story anyway." "No," Liz agreed, putting her phone away. "That's just between us." As they rejoined the celebration inside, Liz caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. 6 months ago, she had been Airline Karen, a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. Tonight, she was an award-winning marketing executive who had learned one of life's most valuable lessons. Never judge someone until you know their whole story. And even then, judge carefully. The red hat that had once provoked such rage in her now seemed like such a small thing, a symbol that had nearly